Welcome to Low Code Campfire, and this is our weekly call where we get together and share things with each other and ask each other questions and hopefully get help from one another. Today we will have a main topic where we're going to allow a Q&A with Anthony Cadden, who is with us on the call here. He presented on the Low Code Campfire this week, and he presented the application that he's worked very hard on for a long time, and it was a very fascinating presentation, and we would definitely, I'm sure we'll have questions for him. So I kind of said this already, but just to reiterate that we're here to share with each other, and we really encourage you to bring something to show, and please ask questions so that we can inspire each other. This call is being recorded, and the recordings of these calls, every session is recorded, and the recordings are posted on YouTube, and you can know when they're posted by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And you can scan that QR code right there if you want to have an easy way to subscribe. And all the sessions are, we keep a contents of this session so that it's easy to find sections that you want to go back and look at again. Our agenda is very simple. We have, we'll start with some introductions and then a first call, and we will, today we're going to have our interview with Anthony Cadden, and we will, if we have time, take a look at the Campfire website and feature requests. And we don't have any submitted topics today, so we won't have that section. And then if we have time, we'll talk about any ghost stories and dark corners and that you've experienced over the past week. And then we'll adjourn the meeting and stop the recording, and we'll stay on for a while to have an unrecorded session where we can chat with each other. So please jump in, show things. You can ask questions either by just unmuting yourself or using the chat window. And you can also use the raise hand function if you want. And very simple guidelines: mute yourself if you're not talking, and be courteous to each other. And that is never a problem with this group. You can submit questions ahead of time by scanning this QR code, and we will address them during the call. So then I'll jump right on to introductions and say hello and good morning to everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody.
Anthony, it's a very, very early good morning for you, isn't it?
just a shy past 3 a.m. in the morning.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us at that very odd hour for you.
That's okay.
All right. So the first thing I'll do is go to first call and see if anybody has any burning questions on their mind that they want to get addressed as soon as possible. All right.
I've got one little question.
Yeah, sure.
The SQL select and SQL advanced query. Which one's supposed to be the faster one? But you can't do a order by in the SQL select compared to the advanced query.
There isn't an order by in the regular select. I don't know why, but I'm surprising that. I'm surprised by that.
Well, when you're doing a more complex SQL code, when I was trying to switch it over, I think one of the previous posts, I think it was on the somewhere. As soon as I tried to change it over, it said the CT. It's just this common table expression that you didn't accept doing an order by at the end of the query, or I had to reformat things.
But doesn't that have a order by input? I can't remember for sure, but I felt like it doesn't have an input for ordering.
Well, you had this change from doing the advanced query, which you said, oh, that's what we're doing. I want you to use the SQL select. We're still doing an SQL call. As soon as I've changed it over it was then sort of saying you can't use your order by statements. So then I can't order by a different column. So I don't know if anyone sort of tried, it has used that SQL select over instead of the advanced SQL query in the listings. It's just the listings things, not in the table, the forms.
Right. Yep.
It's purely an option with the listings.
So yeah, I do know that the standard SQL Select uses CTE to for performance reasons, and so you were taking. Apologize if I didn't get this right, but you were switching from a
all the code that the developers, when they were doing it, they were using advanced queries. So I've got tables which are then union with another table.
Yeah.
And particularly like in the messaging part that I have, I'm displaying the latest response. So there is queries within queries, but then I'll try to then display them in order by not the ID, but the last response date, and that last response date can be out of the responses table, not the actual message table. So it's collecting all different things. So as soon as I changed it over, it was then saying that it's either had to convert it to some XML or other format to then apply an actual order by, which you just used without a problem within the advanced query.
So I did go back and look that. So if you use a standard SQL Select, there is an input for an order by statement, and I don't know if that would if that addresses your concern at all or not. Let me just drag this over onto the screen here so we can take a look at exactly what I'm looking at. So so here's the standard SQL Select, and down here there's an order by input.
Right.
And I do believe that you can, and anybody else, please jump in if you want to comment on this as well. But I believe that you can put multiple columns in here as well. I haven't. I think I've done that in the past, but I can't recall. But I think you can do multiple columns here.
Yes, Patrick, I believe you are correct.
Yep.
I think the problem comes when you've got some very complex SQL logic and you want to put the order in a nested or dependent subquery. That's where it can get a bit complicated. I think in those situations, what we've done is create a stored procedure. So you can call the stored procedure, and you can make sure that the response from the stored procedure is in the order that you want. Whether that's faster than putting it in here, I'm not sure. The other thing is to create views, which the views can't have the order in them, but you can build it up sort of within SQL Server and just use the Client Adapt interface to get the results that SQL Server is already structuring for you.
And I've used both of those solutions also in the past when I've had something very complex that I need to accomplish with SQL. I've used both stored procedures and views, and then called those from the from my data source.
Okay.
Anybody else have any other thoughts or comments on this topic?
The only other thing I would say is I noticed in the low-code cafe, you're talking about reusability and structuring things so that can be reused in other contexts. That could be a good case for putting the SQL logic into stored procedures, because they can be reused in other listings. So it makes it's less manageable in that because it's in a different place. It's in SQL
in
Server.
the server. Yep.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you've got a number of places where you display the same thing, and you want to make a change, rather than having to go into each module and make the change, you just change the stored procedure and Bob's your uncle.
So one thing I haven't learned how to do yet is stored procedures.
It does mean, but you can do it from the SQL console in that you can write
Yeah.
the SQL statement to create them and do that. But that's the masochistic way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's much better if you can get access to the.
I've got access to the backend database.
Yeah.
Especially because with SSMS you have the IntelliSense that helps helps you fill things in and then also showing you the syntax and being able to check your syntax and everything like that. So you have all those additional things. So yeah, it definitely becomes a lot easier in SSMS.
Yeah.
And stored procedures are not difficult to create. Really, what you need to do, the hard part is actually typically writing the SQL itself.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get that working, you have a stored procedure kind of template. You can drop it in, create your variables, and go from there. Not a big deal.
Perfect.
Cool. Any other burning questions from anybody? No. Okay, well, let's move on here. And I once again, as I said earlier, Anthony, I know that it was pre-recorded, but I think we all really enjoyed seeing the session with you on Wednesday. And I mean, it's just an amazing accomplishment that you've done there. It's very, very cool stuff. And so I'll open it up for questions from anybody. And if nobody has any immediate questions, I know that. Oh, go ahead. Somebody was about to say something, I think.
Sorry, that was me. No, I was very interested in the calendar module that you used. That looked very powerful. I didn't quite catch the name.
Yep.
It's called the Brytum calendar.
So
BRYTUM. They're from Scandinavia. They've also, where you're talking about a CAN board, they actually have a CAN board that is part of their collection as well. I've got that, but haven't fully cooked that one up yet for display. Because you can integrate that as well as the calendar and drag and drop.
And was the implementation challenging?
I already had, it was actually interesting, I had the implementations for the full calendar. We had that working first. And it was just because the data coming out had to be reformatted slightly, and they had examples of what to do. So I was able to reorder the JSON being created with the API. So that's how you get the information from the back end through to the calendar. And then the internal parts of clicking on this and it opens up a form or does this sort of function. That was already worked out by the developers on the full calendar, and it was fairly simple move from one across to the other. It was very similar coding. It wasn't too much of a difference where I had to everything had to be rewritten. It was just pointing to a different call or slightly different way. I had to have Delia work through a couple of little things. But it wasn't a too difficult conversion of what we had already with the full calendar to then go across to the Brytum.
Cool.
The only interesting thing that I have is because we have daylight savings, as soon as it goes to daylight saving, a little hiccup occurs where the numbers down one column don't match up with the other column. And I'm not sure if it's to do with the dates coming out of the database, if I've saved them in always UTC or slightly different dates. So I've got a little bit of a thing I've got to look at. And it only occurred when it went to daylight saving. It's like I click on the thing and it's like saying the date's now behind, but it's not but then if it's not in daylight saving, it seems to display fine. So there's a few little quirky things I've got to sort out with a date coming out.
I think that everyone on this call can commiserate with you on that. Dates are so challenging to deal with. They really are.
Well, especially you've
Yeah.
got one, Queensland will be no daylight saving. New South Wales is daylight saving. So you got different time zones
Mhm.
on the same side of like the country.
Yeah. So is the and you know I haven't had a chance to look into it at all, so I apologize if this is obvious or something. But is this a is Brighton Calendar, is it a library, or is it a it's not a DNN module, right? It's
No.
yeah, I didn't think so. Yeah.
No, it's a library where it can be used
Yeah.
with multiple different sort of platforms. We've got Angular. You can sort of tells you how to incorporate with different things. I'll just stick with the HTML, JavaScript.
And so the actual implementation on your site, is that using HTML modules, or is it using
no, so it's done through a form.
form? Okay.
And so that way with the form, we're able to fill out, so other parts within, say, the JavaScript, that gets filled out with a date, or it gets filled out with other parts from the database. So you get that sort of static fill.
Mhm.
But then to do any sort of data pushing backwards and forwards, that's where you're using the component itself, and you're catching the events. And instead of it's doing its usual thing of popping up its own form, you bypass it to say, open up your own form, which is the Plantain app side of things. So then it's still using the Plantain app to do any form entry or form modification, or if I've moved a date, as I move that date, it fires an event within the calendar. We capture that event and then direct it through to push back to an API. So the dates and the appointments moved on the back end, and then I can flow on to do the let the patient know, or let whoever know that a date's been moved.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other thoughts or questions about the calendar?
I stuck a link in the chat. Is that the correct one?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, cool.
And with that same place, that's also got the Kanban task board as well. So that where you can drag and drop. I think once I get that coded in and used within the tasks side of my site, then I can show that again.
Very cool.
Excellent. Other questions for Anthony?
This is Jim. I was very impressed by his user interface there at the, where he had the little tiles moving around and tying to the tabs. Did I hear you correctly in the presentation that the different buttons you have at the top are really in a static text field, and you're just generating those on the?
It's not a static text field. I'm actually using tokens within the skin. So I tried to use the HTML block, and then you still have to then load up another module. Went back to the DNN documentation, and it had a thing there of using tokens within a page. So it's just an extra line you add to your skin, and then I can place a server-based token on the part of the page where I want to have my navigation sitting. And it's literally made without having to use a DNN module at all. So you're not having to wait for a page to load, then it's loading this. It's all created on the server. But then with the actual navigation, if you really want to see it, I can show you the workflows that I've got to then display a navigation for each individual page. So instead of having to put a form or an HTML module, then modify it on the page, I just go back into a workflow, find the one that is for the patient's page or the appointments page, and then just adjust the text of it to then change the display of my navigation system. And that's when I'm not talking about navigation, that's the tabs, because the skin that I've got basically made use of the standard Bootstrap 5 tabs. And I've just taken that and been able to then place all my little placeholders for modules within each of the different tabs, and then just using standard JavaScript. So when you click on a certain navigation, it then changes it's from active to inactive or hidden to, or not hidden. And in that process, the normal part of the page for the Bootstrap 5 for their tabs then changes the tab for me. So I can have multiple tabs on the page without having to have extra multiple tab instances of the Tabs Pro to reduce that overload of the JavaScript on the page.
Yeah, if you're willing to show us some of that implementation, I think that would be great.
Let's see. Let me get into this. I'll bring up a the actual. I'll show you the code of the skin. So I'll just get things up. Because not only navigation, I've got other static parts on the page, which is either displaying a header or the bit on the side about sending a message. And again, there's a separate workflow for each of those. So I can have either static areas and.
Just to check, did you mean to be sharing your screen yet, or?
I was just getting things set up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yep. I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah. So this is the skin file. So the component that I'm talking about is, it's this one here, the My Tokens skin object replacer. So I use that, say, up here to show my like a side menu, which is, it'll be this little section up here. So that part is then created inside of a workflow as well. So then it can change per user, be a different look for a patient page, which is this one down here. So again, that little user component, the difference between that and sort of the other pages is then created in the back end. So you're not having to then load another module to display this function. This one here is also another token. This one's another token and workflow, as well as this navigation bar here. So I then, yep.
But when you say a token and workflow, are you calling a workflow as a token? Is that what's happening there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's sort of a token then calling another token that's running a workflow. So it's, so each of these has like the page header or the different navigations. You've got the one token, which doesn't, but within that token, then I then pass in which tab that the patient's now on, which user ID, so that when it calls the workflow itself, I can then use the caching if I need to for a particular user or a global to then keep that sort of rendered display in memory. So if multiple people are using the site at the same time, you've already got a navigation or a static area pre-made, preloaded, which if it's not changing much, it's sitting there, then you're not having to load that up as a module or a form to do a static display. Where are we here? Just this one. So this is then using the sort of standard tabs part. So I've got, so this is my little code part here to then set up my navigation bar. Which is this one. So this skin will then load up that. So that's actually then loading up nice and fast instead of you've got to wait for a form to then load up into the page. That will call this workflow here, which is the page navigation. At the moment, I've been using a call to an API to then get all the information I need, so patient details or practice details, and that captures everything. So I've got counts of the tasks, counts of instructions to then be able to make the little numbers at the top. I'll have to change those back to now a token because Bogdan's taking away the execute API from action flows. But I was using it that way to then be able to cache in memory. So if I ran this tab navigation workflow, my sidebar navigation workflow, if it called the same information, because it's now sitting in memory, it's not then hitting the database multiple times. It's like you're sort of caching it once and then you be able to then use it in different components because it's the same sort of data that's been pulled out. So if I've got this, my practice patients page, and it's just static, just to create token sections. And I can sort of create the different navigation part, which is just HTML code, which then gets injected into the different sections. So for that particular page, I can then have, that's my main navigation is this one. And it's just the code. And then I can drop in tokens to fill in the different parts. And if I want a hide section, then I'm adding in my hide and then using JavaScript when I click on a button to then take away the hide to then display the tab. So that's that function of the conditional part of the tabs pro I'm doing just with the normal JavaScript. So you're not having to then go back to the server, but I can control the setup from this end. And then I can set up my other navigations on the side. So one's for the messaging part, or I've even got the sub navigation, so a tab within a tab that creates the other navigation down here. And again, they're just tokens that I've then placed specifically into the skin that I have here. And that skin itself, I had an email from Mark. I've just taken a skin off Envato Elements. It was this Medtronic skin, so they've got different versions of it. So I've taken the HTML. I was using a Bootstrap 4 to go down to Bootstrap 3 while all the components were only Bootstrap 3. And then once Plantain App backend was upgraded to the Bootstrap 5, then I've used the Bootstrap 5 skin and just had someone convert the HTML pages that came with that particular skin to a DNN skin. And then that same skin is then what is displayed in the mobile app. And this is the Android version that we have on the Android Studio. Oops, wrong password. So this is the actual Revolution DNN module that was used to create the mobile version for people to use. And this, the Android, we have the fingerprint login. So people instead of having to keep typing the password each time, you can use the fingerprint. And on the iPhone, we have the facial recognition then factored in, and that's custom coding on top of that premium version to get all the extra functionality to it. Hopefully it sort of wants to load up on me. But the actual display inside the screen is the normal mobile page, but then it is a responsive display. So that's what it then displays on the mobile screen. So it's not having to have a separate page for mobile as such. It's just the responsive.
But you actually do have a mobile app.
Yes, but it's a hybrid type scenario where it's a web view component on the inside. And I had this left this running overnight, so that's probably why it's not wanting to connect. I'll shut it down and load it up and see if I can get it going again.
Did you experience any issues getting the app into the various app stores at all?
No, because I used the person that was putting it together, the John from Lightning Labs, who has the component through the DNN store. He does all that for me. So
Oh,
he's done that. So because you've got to get the versions approved, you've got to have the
Oh, yeah.
developers set up. He was the one doing all the coding for the actual mobile app. And it's just again the shell, and I said which buttons I want at the bottom, and then we sort of started the customization because we wanted to be able to access the camera. So in the process, we can use the camera, but that also access the microphone. So we've now got voice recognition within the app. As just as soon as the camera part was activated, it then allowed us all the other components. And
Right, and just sort of as a little clarification, the premium version of that app actually is a service where the maker actually creates the app for you. And
yeah, it's like to do that to the other versions you have, it's like a shell. This one to have the actual buttons made. It's more of that custom design, because then he's then got to put something on your server, because that's how you then pick up. And doesn't want to connect. Let's do that. I'll see if I can get it going, then I'll show it again. But yeah, that had to be, because you've got to capture the phone ID. That is the part of the step. And you need to have that for the push notifications. You need that phone ID to then pass across to the Firebase to be able to do that that step. And, all right, I'll just unshare and I'll get this thing up and going again.
Okay, that's fine.
But then as part of that sort of premium one, he's making the Android and the iPhone at the same time. And then it gets, you're up to then put it up onto the store so people can go to the App Store and download the native app, rather than having to go to the website, grab the icon, or get a PWA and try to load that onto the screen.
Right.
Here.
Once you have that developed, and then changes that you make in Plantain app flow out to that app without the
Yes,
involvement of your
because
mobile app.
yeah, so I
developer?
can change anything related to the site. If I want to change to a different theme, that is just then running as a web view inside. So it's this hybrid type thing. If you needed to change, say the wording on a button or the splash screen, then I've got to go back to him to make that sort of change. But if it's anything to do with just the app itself, that is done through the site, because it's that web view. That's the beauty about it. You're not having to have a development, and then I need to have someone log in, and if they log in as a patient, they get displayed certain things. If they come in as a practice user or a hospital device rep or someone else, they'll have different permissioning, so they'll have different screens to actually see, or a different theme to display on the phone. So I can then control that from the Plantain app website, from the website itself, rather than, oh, I've got to code that I've got to create a version for this user, I've got to create a version for that user, or my screen's now changed and now I've got to modify it, recode it, recompile, resubmit. I can make a change and then it's instantaneous. So there's no extra new download that someone has to have.
But you do always have to keep in mind responsiveness in order for it to work correctly. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why when we're sort of testing it out, we're always like, I've got an Android, I've got my iPhone, we're looking how it appears onto the screen. So we've modified it several times to get it to work properly.
Yeah.
Being mindful that that's why we tried to have that sort of appearance that it's wanting to be like an app.
And I think you commented on this on Wednesday, but just to touch on it again, are most of your patients using mobile devices, do you think, or?
Because of COVID, everyone had to get a mobile
Yeah.
device. Even 80-year-olds have a smartphone.
Yeah.
And everyone's now used to using a smartphone device because they've had to.
Mhm.
So
So it's well.
no,
So the effort you've put into this mobile app is well worth it.
yes, it was just by chance that everyone's now trained how to use a mobile device, how to download an app, how to fill out a form, how to do a registration. So it was that sort of definitely helped. You're not having to say, well, now we've got to convince people or get a phone that's going to be able to work with an app. Everyone now actually has a phone because of what they had to do with registering for when they went into a restaurant or any other place.
Am I right in thinking that the app requires a live connection all the time? There's no offline capacity. Is that right?
When you first come up, it sort of, if sometimes it'll show a page or it's already got a pre-rendered page, but because the site's more dynamic, it's not really caching that side of things. I think that you do have some of that ability, but because it's sort of changing all the time, I haven't got that sort of caching of a page, because you'll come back to your messages and there could be a new one you don't want to cache from 5 minutes ago.
Absolutely. It's good to know that that's a possibility. You know, that's available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as you don't have the internet connection, then the app doesn't sort of respond.
Okay, makes sense.
Any other questions or queries about what I did?
You mentioned that you had 200 workflows.
Oh yeah, I've already broken. I'm waiting for. I cannot go past version 1.22 because as soon as I go to version 1.23, I've managed to break their forms. The JSON didn't have enough length to it, so I'm currently waiting for them to extend the length, because when you go to do the action drop down, it'll just, every time you create an entity, there's multiple actions being made. So I've got like 200 entities within the database. So each of those then creates like 4 or 5 actions per, and then the API section has over 1,000 APIs, even though I haven't made 1,000 APIs. They get created each time something then gets added. So yes, I've managed to break it, and I can't upgrade any further until that little tweak is made.
So I know in the community or in the Campfire submissions, you put together a submission that lets you modify forms and things from all over the site. Have you done something similar for the other ones to help you manage that quantity of different objects all through the thing, different tabs and workflows? And
no, just going to the workflow area, and because you can then put sort of namespaces to each of them, then I don't need to, like, that sort of makes it easier to then order the different workflows. That was a big, like when I started making it, is I need to get the categories. So you had categories for the patient page, security sections, utility workflows. So that makes it easier to then manage. Although that when I go into that page or I try to use the tokens, because I've got so many, it does take a bit of time for it to load up. I don't know how many tokens that have been made for the site.
Yeah, I noticed when you showed your tokens earlier that was a lengthy list. not just of namespaces, but then you expanded a namespace, and there were a lot of tokens in the namespace.
Where is this?
When you're bringing in other practices, are you setting them up with a separate instance of the whole thing, or is it?
No.
Okay.
No. This is the thing. Instead of, I wanted it so that a patient comes in, they have the one interface, but then all the other practices, to then see all the different practices instead of having to go into each different site.
Okay.
So it's, yes, it's like having multiple portals within the one portal. So you come in as a practice, you've got your, like this, the display will be the same. You won't have a different theme for the different ones, but you come in as like their own sort of separate portal in themselves without having portals within the site. That's something we had to come up with quite early to do that. But then that information is then not put up into the query string, so you can sort of model things around. We try to keep things in the back end, but that creates a few little issues where I'm going to have to change a few things, because if you have it in session, it sometimes loses that session and then the things don't work. So when that sort of concept of having the unique UID in the database, keeping some information with it that was put up by Ben, was like, oh, that's the solution that I want. But I need to have that for each individual user, not just this page, and then if someone comes to that page and they're doing the same thing, because you've got multiple actions happening on the one page rather than I go to a separate page to do the task or a separate page to send a message. You could be on that one page for a patient, and all that functionality is on the one page in itself.
Yeah. So all of the data for all the practices and all the patients is in the one data store.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So then, so a practice can then communicate with another practice, but then you're not trying to then pass to another and speak to another instance. It's in the one space.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. That definitely presents a high level of complexity.
Yes, yeah, so that's why like I'm trying to reuse components, because and then so you come in as onto each page, a different practice may display slightly different things, or if you've got a different user coming onto the page, I've created the SQL such that if you're a certain role, you only see that data, but instead of having, and you're doing a if statement inside your SQL to say, well, you're a doctor, you get that call to the database, but you're a secretary, you get this call down here, so you get to see a bit more than what, or a filter down, so that you're only seeing the patients for that doctor, but a secretary may be seeing patients for all doctors. So it's even with the database calls, it's sort of querying out and sort of self-selecting, and but then if you don't match up security-wise for that person in that practice, then you won't see any data. Or the other bit is granular sort of credentialing on each page. So instead of, that's why I don't use the roles inside of DNN. It's now a customized role. So a page will then look to see what user are you, and then if you're not able to use that page, instead of saying, oh, you're not authorized, it goes, all right, well, I'm going to see which is your dashboard page, and then flick you back to that dashboard. So
okay.
so it's not using the DNN roles, it's custom sort of role based inside, so they can control. And and that's where I've sort of moved pages around. Oh, this page is not working. Oh, I've got to add that extra permissioning to that particular page for a user to come in and actually access.
So in the US, we have what they refer to as HIPAA requirements. I'm assuming something similar in Australia.
No, they don't. It's funny, we don't have HIPAA here in Australia. Because we kept looking into that, but I've tried to design it as such that anything we're doing, so any of the server logs, when we had the backup part of it set up, that was then being moved off and stored. But anything happening inside of the site is then recorded as well. So I know if someone's, say, looked at instructions, because it records that they've looked at that instruction, or if someone's tried to look at an instruction that's not theirs, then it gets recorded that they've tried to look at that. So that sort of meets that HIPAA, but also you can then see, well, what are people using through the site? And I know that Mark sort of brought up about, well, how do we know if someone's having an error on a page? How do we capture that? Well, because I'm sort of recording these things, I could then quite easily then record, well, what was the person doing prior to that action, to see that user flow to pick things up. rather than have to constantly put it back to the log. You go, well, which user they had that problem, but this one didn't, and you're trying to go through the logs to find that particular person. I could then sort of do that as a separate thing.
Well, so you're capturing a lot of information with every session that somebody has.
Yeah, so each different thing that's occurring, just so that you could, if I've like sort of in the practice part where I'm creating a procedure, if I'm adding equipment or adding an item, I log each part. So there's now a visibility for everyone to see that, oh, this person created the procedure, that one has looked at it. Well, this person added a kit, but this person over here deleted the kit. At the moment, it's all just paperwork or someone just making a phone call. So there's no documented history of who cancelled that equipment or who ordered the wrong equipment or who moved the appointment around.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, David, for the comment. Just Anthony, in case you're not seeing it in the chat.
Yeah, just
yeah,
I saw that last one.
You're finding a lot of inspiration here, so that's great.
Yeah, I think I'm pushing it to its extreme. But as I said, when I started looking at other components, I wanted to be able to get my hands in and know how to do something. I'd seen literally the .NET Nuke start from the iSpy from Microsoft, so I could see how that go through. So I had an idea. Didn't think I could go this far with it. But yeah, the issue when you try to use other modules is like, well, no, it's only doing a certain thing, and you want to modify it, then you got to go back to the developer, and then you can't really do what you want it to do. Here, I need to sort of change something. You can change it on the go. And then you watch some of the Café videos or the Campfire videos, you get inspiration, and you go for a search around the net, say, how do I do this? How do I create a stored procedure? And it's all there for you. So that's my next challenge. And I'd already been looking at, well, yes, because I've got sometimes the same database call occurring across different forms, and then it makes it hard to then manage because you don't know where you've got that particular code. So yes, to move it across into the stored procedures would be the next part.
Yeah. I had a question earlier that I thought of earlier when we're looking at the workflows. Is the number of workflows you have, is that driven by the fact that you've organized them in a way that that a lot of your workflows are calling other workflows into their process? So you've kind of made it a spread out processes so that you can get tiny details of each thing that needs to happen. Is that?
Yeah. So where it was like action stacks within the forms. So like with the task one, let me see if I can find what it is and show how, like, I was sort of converting that all into a workflow, so that it's easy to then manage. You're not trying to, if you've got multiple forms, you're saying, well, I'll just run that workflow, or but then the workflows are then broken up into workflows within workflow. So then you're using that sort of, so you can control different components to it.
Yep.
Let's see.
It definitely helps, especially if those small parts of the workflow need to be used in multiple for multiple purposes and in other workflows, or if you call just that small workflow in particular. So it helps in that respect. It also helps when you're looking at a workflow to for it not to be quite so overwhelming. The one thing I found, and I don't know if you have comments on this, is that sometimes when I'm trying to dissect a process and see where something might be going wrong, it gets, for me, it tends to get a little frustrating that, okay, so I have this workflow here, and now now I got to go look at the process for the other workflow, and sometimes I even open up multiple screens
Yeah.
so that I can have all
Well,
my workflows that are nested with each other, and I can look at them at the same time. But it gets so
That's why I put in the suggestion that I can, if you wanted to see that workflow, instead of now I've got to
Yeah.
go back to the workflow page and now I've got to scroll through and find it,
if
can
you
I
can just
click on it and it opens up that workflow in
Yep.
another screen.
Yeah.
But I try to use workflows a lot for when I do things, I'll capture, say, the information from on the form, and then you can do the testing of your workflow and seeing how everything flows through.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other part that I do make use of a lot. We got this one.
Do others on the call does everyone work a lot nesting their workflows? Anybody have any other comments on that?
I know I am nesting them sometimes, but not all the time. I
Oh,
do rather try to keep it contained within one if I can, just for the ease of getting in there and modifying them.
Yeah. Okay.
But if it
Well,
makes sense to make it modular, then yeah.
well, the one thing I do is when I now have the message to speed up things, there's a lot of the actions of now I've got to attach all these different people to different sections. That was taking up time. So I've even gone to where Dale had we have an email sort of back-end scheduler to sort of send out your emails. To speed up the process of the workflows, I'll put what I need to do to add lots of things to other tables. I'll put that as a JSON, pass that off to another table. That gets fires in action on the entry of the data to then go through and run through the rest of the processing, adding the listing of files to something, or the number of people to it as well. So you sort of offloading some of the functions of your workflow into the back end as a call afterwards. So then on the front side, it looks like everything's running nice and smoothly, but you still got some extra bits to do. You just sort of put it in an in tray and say, here, plan an app, run that once it hits the in tray, so the patient can go, or the user can go on to do the rest of what they need to do.
Excellent. I know that you were trying to get your the emulation of your Android environment working. Is that success there?
I'll get it going before we finish.
Okay, that's fine if you. I just wanted to check in with you to see how it was going. Real quick, since we're getting towards the end here, I just wanted to.
Here we go.
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Make sure it's coming up. There we go. Screen. So this is the screen for the mobile. So I've got, these are the different buttons that then come, that you're then programming into it. We sort of kept it down to sort of fairly common things. So if you want to see your what's been changed over to chats now, so you're coming in, but then that's doing the same function of what's actually happening on the web page. And this is where I've had to work on getting the spacing right, because sometimes the form or the buttons won't display correctly on this version of the Android. So I've got to continually work around getting the spacing right, so then it's not flowing over. But then the forms always put this padding on the top of the button, and now I've got to sort of remove that part to it. And then I've got a button to say, well, here's my extra menu. And because I'm running it through the Plant app, I'm not having to do a custom part for this page. This sort of part here could then have different buttons for, say, a hospital user when they're using the app, or a secretary when she's using the app. But again, coming in onto the home page, that is the normal home page here. So you can see there's other elements, but then on the mobile, it's the exact same page being displayed across the two. But on the mobile version, I will do media queries to make different parts disappear. or different parts of the text not display, or make the navigation buttons are not as large. I've just got to redo things to take the button where it's displaying on this part and have it display down in the bottom part. But again, because you're sort of using a web view part inside the mobile app, what you change on the page will then instantaneously be changed within the app without having to then recompile, send it off, have them check it, make sure it sort of complies. So it sort of bypasses that multiple versions, so you can change things quite rapidly without having to say, well, now we're up to version 10 of our mobile app with the processing, and make sure people then download the latest version. It's all within the skin. So the major things that we upgrade will be, oh, there was a change in the version of Android and that wasn't working with Firebase, and the libraries changed, so then they had to update that and then send us the solution. So there's little tweakings like that, but the actual running of the kind of the app and the look of the site is then the same as the website.
That really sounds
Selecting-
like a,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I think that's huge, that you can just update your app through your website whenever you need to and when it's appropriate. To tweak things, fix things without creating an update for your app, I think that's really huge.
Yeah,
That's when
exactly
I came
what I was going to
across
say.
that. When I came across that on the store, I was like, hey, this is actually quite cool. And then I've looked into it further, and yes, it is that a different user can have a different view.
Have you explored the possibility of having loading a different skin when people are accessing it through the mobile app, rather than having to make it, just do it with a single responsive skin, so you can customize it, or you could even have a slightly different version for Android and iPhone?
When someone logs in, I can see what device they're coming in on. I've got a little holding page that sort of picks up some information. So it goes to, where are we? It's not displaying here. There's a little bit a page in between when I'm using the normal devices where I can capture that. To then have the different skins in themselves. When I've tried to put it up on the top page, or I'd have to maybe sort of then create another page and direct that person to that particular page. But if someone was to come in with under a different thing as a practice, then yes, they'll have a different skin appearance because they're going to different pages which have that different effect. Let's see if I can do a different user and show you. So I control when someone's coming in through the mobile as to what pages they end up with.
Does that suggest that you sometimes have to make a totally separate page, but with repeated content presented differently, depending on platform they're using?
No. So it's just because everything's a user-based role. So as I said, a secretary then comes in with that particular skin. It has that sort of appearance to it rather than the patient side. So a different page will have a different skin applied to it. And doesn't wants to play silly buggers, but yeah, so that's how I get the different things. And I tried to sort of do things where you have a page and someone comes on a mobile device that displays a different skin. I was trying to put that into the configuration settings, but it just didn't seem to fire on me all the time.
Yeah.
When you say
but
skin, are you
Yep.
referring to what DNN was calling skins, or are you saying
Yeah.
that you're loading different content depending on who's coming?
Well, I can have one as a different skin. So that's a sort of the skin for a secretary. This is the skin for a patient. So I've got a different sort of theme, which I then you load in sort of different components for that different user. So even so the menu down the side here, that's using the nav XP to then control what tabs then get displayed. And then even with that, within the nav XP, everything's then controlled with another security token so that only that particular person sees that tab on the side. So it's still not even using the DNN roles to control what sort of tabs get displayed on the navigation.
Cool. I'm going to jump in here for a second and put a wrap on the actual recorded presentation, and I just wanted to thank you, and please keep in mind that we'll stick around for a bit after this if we want to have a little bit more discussion. But I just wanted to thank you, Anthony, so much for coming in and joining us at this time of your day, and for sharing with us so much. It's really been a great conversation, and we all genuinely appreciate it.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Anthony.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.
So happy low coding, everybody, and I'll go ahead and stop the recording here. And we will see you again next week.